Now I'd like to bring up director Marc Levin. He's been making documentaries and features for over 20 years. His 1998 film Slam won the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes and the Camera d'Or at Cannes. Other films include Mob Stories, The Execution Machine, Texas Death Row, Soldiers in the Army of God. And we're so happy to have him here today to take our questions after this powerful film. Marc Levin.
Thank you all for coming, and I hope you'll bear with us. We found that after this film, there's a real desire to talk and comments and questions, and so I'll just open it up to anybody who's got a question or comment.
You've obviously put a lot of time and effort and research into anti-Semitism, protocol design and stuff. So my basic question is, what do we do? You know?
It's a good question. Obviously, for me, going out and making a film was the first step. And I guess I would say that this isn't just about Jew hatred or anti-Semitism. We live in a world now after 9/11 where fanatics of all faiths, whether it's Muslims who we are involved in this struggle with now, Christians, Jews, Hindus, they're fanatics of all faiths who believe that people that embrace an open society, a tolerant society, a multicultural society are their enemies. And all of you sitting in this theater, we know in New York City only 3 or 4 weeks ago there was a threat on the New York subway line. Well, nobody's going to strap themselves up and go in and ask, are you a Jew, a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, whatever. So the question that you ask is, how do we combat? You saw that 3-year-old young girl up there who doesn't even know what hate is yet,
right,
and yet being brainwashed. How do you combat that? I don't have the answer to that question. I say quite honestly that you and your generation, this is the great question on the table. As for my generation, the Cold War, I grew up 50 years, the Cold War. This is the question your generation is going to wrestle with. I offer this alone, that whatever our feelings about the war on terror in Afghanistan, in Iraq, we know the military is not the solution to this. This is a battle of ideas, of beliefs. And I feel culture matters, whether it's film, whether it's music, whether it's poetry, whether it's journalism, whether it's dance, whether it's painting. In other words, the creative arsenal has got to be engaged in this, because ultimately it is not just a rational debate, it is a debate of faith. And so I say to all of you that you got to find your own way. My way was just staggering out of 9/11 and asking questions, and as a filmmaker putting this together. But everybody has got to find their own way to become engaged in this struggle. It's not easy, it's going to take time, but it requires the creative community to get involved.
When you interviewed the skinhead in West Virginia, I was surprised that he was talking to you very matter-of-factly, and you didn't really protest any of the things that he was saying. I found it kind of to be a strange conversation with some of those so anti-Semitic.
Well, I think that's a very good question. Let me say 2 things about that. First of all, I want to tell you how I got to Sean Walker. I called up the National Alliance, which is the largest white power neo-Nazi group in the United States. I introduced myself and started explaining what I hope to do. He cut me off immediately. He said, Levin, I know who you are. You're a Jew, you're a filmmaker, and you made that film Gladiator Days, which is a film I made for HBO. There was a pause. He said, I love that film. In fact, we bootleg it. I was kind of thrown by that, and he said, we've decided that we are going to extend an invitation to you and your crew. You don't need bodyguards, you don't need extra security. I will admit, when we were driving up the mountains of West Virginia, one member of my crew, all of us were looking at our cell phones. We got no reception. the town was on no map, and my sound man said to me, Mark, are you sure we're not about to be set up and stop in some field or forest and a bunch of skinheads come out with baseball bats and beat us down? That was not the case. But as far as the tone, you saw at one moment I was not able to keep just a cool. When he told me that Rupert Murdoch was a Jew, I did just kind of crack up because I couldn't quite believe it. And we did go on to an argument which is not in the film. And as we were discussing, I realized in his mind, the word Jew itself was a very plastic term. In other words, because Rupert Murdoch was a media mogul, by definition, he was a Jew. It didn't matter if he was raised as a Methodist, or I think he's actually converted to Catholicism. That didn't matter. Now, I want to just relate to you what was in my head in terms of talking to a lot of these extremists and why I didn't want to just get in a fight or combat immediately. You heard the inciting incident in the film where I was in a cab with a young Egyptian cab driver, and he was repeating all these things, as I said in the beginning of the film. Well, there is a part of that story that I didn't relate in the film, which I'll share with you, which is once he was the first person that connected the protocols with these new rumors about 9/11. So after I'd said, you know, he happened to be listening to a hip-hop station, and it was playing The Roots, which is a group I've worked with. I actually made a movie with Brooklyn Babylon. So I figured this kid is pretty hip. I can talk to him honestly. I had the New York Times in my hand. I was like, come on, man, there's hundreds of Jews that died. He said it was all written 100 years ago. I lost my cool at that point. I said to him, my great-grandfather was at that meeting. He slowed down. He wasn't, this is literally weeks after 9/11. He was not quite sure what to make of that. We came to a light, and he turned around. Look, you know, who am I? Undercover cop, counterterrorism, FBI, Mossad, what's going on? I looked right in his eyes. I said, let me give you some advice. Shut up and do what we say. He almost crashed. He pulled over. He asked me to get out. He got out. Now, he went into a coffee shop. I followed him. This is the point. I sat down next to him, and he started relating to me his life story. He was from Alexandria, Egypt. He did love rap music, and he started telling me how every time he bought a rap CD, and if fundamentalists in his neighborhood saw, they would grab it, smash it, and beat him up. Every time he bought a DVD of an American or European movie, they would grab it, smash it, and beat him up. Finally, he couldn't take it. He left his own hometown, he left his home country, came to New York, dreaming of getting into the music business, having an American girlfriend. And I'm thinking, this is so strange. Only 20 minutes ago, he's telling me this new lie, the Jews, 9/11, marrying it to the old lie that won't die, the protocols, yet he himself was a victim of fanaticism. And I left that evening confused and intrigued, and yet I thought if I had just popped off, we would have separated, and the second part of this story I would have never known. So I kept that in mind, even with a Sean Walker and many others, and not always succeeding in getting to that second beat or that second act, but hoping that if you could withstand the blast of hate, maybe you could get to something deeper.
I just thought it was an interesting juxtaposition that you were given such easy access, you could say, to the National Alliance sort of like, you know, distribution center in West Virginia, yet you had such a hard time getting in touch with Rob Reiner. And so I was just curious, like, what you thought, you know, just sort of comment on that as, you know, as a Jewish filmmaker, you could get inside a neo-Nazi organization, but as a Jewish filmmaker, it's harder to sit down with other Jewish filmmakers.
It's well said. Look, Rob Reiner and Larry David, I don't know if you saw Larry David's show 6 weeks ago on, you know, Curb Your Enthusiasm, his show on the Passion of Christ. I don't know how many people saw it. Certainly, whatever questions I had, he answered and went well beyond. I think these guys, the reason I reached out for them is obviously they've kind of been on the they've been willing to take stands. But Hollywood in general, the bigger question, which Frank Rich, who obviously was a Jewish cultural so-called heavyweight who did take Mel Gibson on, I went to a symposium where I heard him say that what scared him more than the movie was the fact that there was no coherent response from the Hollywood Jewish community. And I think there are a number of factors to that. First, some people honestly felt that Abe Foxman and others made a mistake attacking the movie, that it only added to the controversy surrounding it and it helped Mel Gibson. So silence was better. Second, Mel Gibson is still part of the celebrity, the celebrity culture. He's a star. And the kind of unwritten rule of going at other stars. And then third, look, if you've read Neil Gabler's book or The History of Hollywood, and obviously the Jewish moguls who came from the Pale, the Russian Pale, through New York to LA, they helped create Hollywood, and yet like many immigrants, they wanted to get rid of their immigrant roots. They wanted to de-Judaize themselves, and they created this mythic America. Now that was 70, 80 years ago, admittedly, but there is a residue of that and ambivalence about Hollywood's Jewishness and the power that Jews have in Hollywood. And people are uncomfortable talking about it. I certainly, maybe I was naive, thinking that people were ready, you know, when The Passion came out, but it's something that I will admit to you is not restricted to Hollywood. This film, you saw I had earlier in the film an elderly scholar and mystic, Lionel Ziprin, who basically says to me, don't make the movie. And there are people in the Jewish community in the United States who aren't comfortable with this dialogue that's happening right now, to talk about Jew hatred, to talk about the protocols. They feel this is a subject that only should be discussed at home with family and friends that you trust and should never be aired publicly like this, no matter how well-intentioned. As Lionel said, because 1,700 years of history teaches that people are going to come burn down the shul, they're going to come rape the women, they're going to come beat down the men. Now that's living in a shtetl. We don't live in a shtetl. I grew up, and many of you who are my age, we grew up in maybe the greatest golden age of Jewish history here in the United States. So obviously, I don't agree with that, but I respect people who feel that way, and that feeling runs deep, that just it's not appropriate to discuss this stuff publicly.
I would like to put the question to you, what is it that we can do? And you left the matter, in a sense, up to each individual as to what to do. And it really should not be left there. It needs to be said that we need more activity from the audience that's here today in terms of activity with the Anti-Defamation League, with camera, with B'nai B'rith.
One of the things I learned making this film is that we as Jews have a responsibility to fight hate on all fronts. Given what we have experienced, given what our history has taught us, we need to be on the forefront. And we know there are fanatics of all faiths, including Jewish fanatics. We witnessed that this summer in Gaza, to my amazement, to see Jewish zealots who were actually calling for the end of Sharon, of all people, to get rid of him. So my point is that we have to find our way, whether it's organizationally, through Jewish organizations, through other organizations, but there are fanatics, not just Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, who believe their hate is holy, that violence is sacred, and if you or I do not agree with their divine insights, we are expendable. We all have to find a way to fight that. I agree it goes beyond individual action, but I leave it to everyone here to make the choices of which of those organizations will be best suited for them in that struggle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, the folks who are still in line, we've run out of time. We've got another show and people waiting, so.
Let me just, on the personal level, what this gentleman said, I want to thank you for all coming here, and I will ask all of you to at least whatever your feelings about the film, to tell people about this film, to encourage a dialogue, to find your way to amplify the discussion that we just started today. Thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.